Imagine it's a spring morning in South London, April 2nd, 2024. You're out for a typical morning stroll in a beautiful green public park. It's the kind of place where locals walk their dogs, kids play on the weekends, and people go to just escape the noise of the city. It's so normal, completely ordinary. But on this particular morning, a local dog walker notices their dog has run off, interested in something hidden in the bushes. The owner walks over expecting to find some trash or maybe an animal. Instead, they look down and make a discovery so horrific that it immediately destroys the peace of the park and triggers one of the most gruesome murder investigations in recent UK history. What the dog had uncovered was a human bone. And as the police swarmed the park, they realized this wasn't just a body dump, it was a jigsaw puzzle of horrors. Arms, legs, a head, scattered across the park. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was the result of a sadistic, bloodthirsty fantasy brought to life by two people who shared a sick perversion. A couple who lured an innocent mother into a trap, murdered her, and then went shopping for power tools and bleach like it was just another Sunday morning. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're heading to London in England to discuss a case that is so dark and so deeply upsetting. It honestly feels like a horror movie, but it's all real. Today we're talking about the murder of 38-year-old Sarah Mayhew, a woman who simply wanted to enjoy an evening out, but instead crossed paths with two monsters. This case is about what psychologists call a folie à deux, a madness shared by two. It's what happens when two deeply disturbed individuals find each other, amplify their darkest urges, and then turn their sick fantasies into a reality. If you are as fascinated with the world of true crime as I am, then you've definitely found the right place to join our amazing community and get new videos every single week. Please subscribe now. Also, hitting that like button would greatly help the channel grow and allow more people to hear these important stories. And if you want to become a more active part of this community, I'd love for you to consider becoming a channel member. You will not only help sustain the channel, but you will also get instant access to our private Discord server, and that's where the conversation really continues. We can have in-depth discussions about the cases on here, share theories, and honestly just chat about life and anything else that comes to mind. It's a fantastic community of like-minded people, so if that sounds like your kind of place, you can just click the join button below this video. All right, get comfortable, and please be warned that the details of this case are graphic and disturbing. The language used is disturbing. So let's talk about the horrific murder of Sarah Mayhew. In cases like this, where the disposal of the body is so gruesome, it's incredibly easy for the victim to just get lost in the headlines and the gore of it all. They become the remains in the park, the human bone, the leg, but we cannot let that happen here. Sarah Mayhew was 38 years old in the spring of 2024. She lived in Croydon, a large town in South London. She was a vibrant, living, breathing human being. Her mother, Angela, described her as a beautiful, pretty girl, a woman who was bubbly, she was chatty and funny. Sarah was also a mother. She had two boys aged 12 and 15, two young teenagers who relied on her, who loved her, and who were just going through the complexities of growing up. Now, life had not always been easy for Sarah. She had her own struggles to deal with, and she had faced some hardships, and her path wasn't always smooth. But despite her vulnerabilities, she was trying. She was a much-loved daughter and a caring mother who had the entire rest of her life ahead of her. She deserved a chance to watch her boys grow into men. She deserved to overcome her struggles and find peace. Her greatest misfortune, as the judge would later say in court, was crossing paths with the two people who would take all of that away from her. So how did Sarah, a mother from Croydon, end up crossing paths with two killers? The connection traces back years prior. Sarah had actually met a man named Stephen Sansom on a dating website, and they had gone on a few dates, and according to court documents, they had engaged in a pretty brief, casual sexual relationship back then. It wasn't some big romance, it was just a short connection, the kind of brief encounter that happens thousands of times in the dating world. And eventually they drifted apart, just going their separate ways. But in January of 2024, Steven reached back out to her. He popped back into her life, sliding into her messages, trying to reconnect their old connection. Now, we've all been there, right? An old flame or a past fling sends a "hey, how you doing" text out of the blue. You might think that they're lonely or they're reminiscing or they're just trying to catch up with you. Sarah, likely seeing no harm in it, responded. She had no idea that Steven wasn't looking to rekindle a romance. He was hunting. Sarah began to believe that they were actually moving towards a relationship. I'm guessing this happened all through texts and phone calls. She was reportedly trying to impress him, acting as if they were boyfriend and girlfriend. She was looking for a connection. But Steven and his actual current partner, Gemma Watts, were looking for a victim. And I believe all of this kind of happened on the phone and through text. I don't know if they actually met up in person a lot. It was more of like this rekindling of their relationship via phone. And to understand the sheer brutality of what actually happened to Sarah, we need to look at these two people, the two individuals responsible. 45-year-old Steven Sansom and his 49-year-old partner, Gemma Watts. Let's start with Steven, because this man should never have been able to actually walk the streets freely in the first place. So back in 1998, when Steven was around 19 years old, he ordered a mini cab in East Croydon to take him home. It's like a taxi. And it was Christmas Eve, and the driver was a 59-year-old man named Terence Boyle, described by everyone who knew him as a quiet, gentle, unassuming family man, a father of two. Now, once they reached the destination, Steven pulled out a kitchen knife. His intention was to rob the driver, Terence. Steven then began viciously attacking Terence, stabbing him and cutting his throat. The fatal wound was 12 centimeters long, slicing so deep it reached the bone of his cervical spine. Terence fought for his life. He had defensive wounds on his hands, but he didn't survive. And what did Steven get for destroying a family on Christmas Eve? A wallet containing 25 pounds. Steven was convicted of murder and given a life sentence, but in the UK justice system, a life sentence doesn't always mean life behind bars. So in 2019, after serving his minimum term of just 10 years, Steven was released on life license. So this means he was free to live in the community under supervision for the rest of his life. He moved into a ground floor flat in Sutton, southwest London. Now, by the time 2023 rolled around, Steven had linked up with 49-year-old Gemma Watts. Now, Sarah, funnily enough, was actually the one to introduce Steven to Gemma in the summer of 2023. And their relationship, you guys, was an absolute nightmare. By the way, Gemma knew Steven was released from prison for murder and he was on life license, so she knew what he was capable of. Their relationship wasn't a partnership built on love or mutual respect. Their dynamic was characterized by intense sadomasochist violence. They were completely obsessed with each other, but in the most toxic, dangerous way possible. Their bond was so intense, so warped, that they frequently talked about dying together if they ever got caught. On September 7th, 2023, Gemma sent Steven a message saying that should any serious injury or death occur while they were being intimate, it should be understood that Gemma entered violent and dangerous sex games with him of her own free will. Steven even went by the alias Red Rum on his Facebook profile, and if you spell that backwards, it spells murder. This is the level of psychopathic arrogance that we're dealing with here. Together, Steven and Gemma formed what criminologists called folie à deux. When two deeply disturbed individuals get together, they don't just balance each other out, they actually act like echo chambers. They validate each other's darkest, most taboo urges. What might start as a sick thought in one person's head becomes a shared reality when the other person encourages it. They fed off each other's depravity, and as soon as they realized that their violent, bloodthirsty fantasies weren't enough to satisfy them anymore, they needed to now do the real thing. The digital evidence in this case is huge. The police recovered a massive amount of WhatsApp messages between Steven and Gemma, spanning just a 7-month period, but it was huge. Just 7 months, and there was so much. Reading through the timeline of these texts is like watching a slow motion crash into a nightmare. In September 2023, the messages show Gemma talking about having sexual intercourse with Steven while he was covered in someone else's blood. So was this just dark roleplay, or was this the seed of a sadistic plan? But it escalated quickly. They started talking about eating human meat, and Steven even messaged Gemma saying that nothing was too far for them. Everything they talked about included violence. They wondered what human meat would taste like. And Stephen even said it sounded fun when Gemma suggested he could fuck, feast, and kill your way around the country. Stephen messaged Gemma saying he loved how fucked up she was, how her mind was just like his, and they were completely twins. Then Sarah Mayhew's name entered the chat. Gemma had somehow decided that Sarah owed her money. Even though it was a pretty trivial matter, Gemma texted Stephen saying that even if Sarah paid her the money, she was still going on their list. And what was their list? Based on an image Stephen downloaded of a woman's body and hands covered in blood, investigators concluded the list was a roster of people they planned to harm or kill with a knife. Gemma's messages were dripping with venom and jealousy. She texted that Sarah was pissing her off big time and that she just had a lust to just stab a skank. By November 2023, the fantasy had hardened into a solid concrete plan. They discussed getting Sarah to Stephen's flat in Sutton to cut her throat. On November 9th, Stephen asked Gemma how fucked up she wanted to get, and Gemma responded, very. Gemma explicitly suggested getting Sarah to the flat, and Stephen, eager to please his partner's sick desires, said he would try. Gemma said only if the deal is that she doesn't leave in one piece. They talked about slitting Sarah's throat over Gemma's face. It's really sick. Like, when I was reading through these messages, I was like, I can't even believe, but people really talk like this, like for real, to each other. For months, they plotted. And for some reason, they did this all over WhatsApp. They just like marinated in this sadistic plan. And then came early 2024. Stephen reconnected with Sarah on the dating app, playing the part of rekindling their romance. And in January 2024, Stephen made his first attempts to lure Sarah over to his place, texting her he was having a little party, on his own, and that he felt horny and that he had some drugs. And he tried to get her to come over a few times, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen then. But Stephen didn't give up. He kept talking to Sarah on the phone, building this false sense of security, this relationship, playing into her desire for a connection. And that's probably why she felt they were developing this romantic relationship, because they talked so much. And finally, Sarah agreed to meet him on the evening of Friday, March 8th, 2024. The evening of March 8th, this is where the trap snaps shut. At 8:15 p.m., both Stephen and Gemma are together at Stephen's ground floor flat. And they know exactly what's going to happen that night. They have planned it for months. At around 11 p.m., Stephen leaves the flat and he walks out into the cool London night to meet Sarah. And we don't know exactly where they met up, but CCTV cameras capture Stephen and Sarah walking back together, entering the block of his flats where he lived. Sarah is seen walking willingly. She thinks she's there for a date, for a hookup, to spend time with the guy she likes, the guy she's been talking to for months. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking into a slaughterhouse. Sarah Mayhew was never seen alive again. What happened inside that flat is the stuff of absolute nightmares. We know that Gemma was waiting inside. We know, based on the forensic evidence and the blood found later, that Sarah was taken into the kitchen or the lounge area. The judge at Old Bailey described this horrifying moment. She stated, her fear and suffering must have been acute as she realized why she was there and what was happening. She was an innocent woman lured to that flat to die in order that you could both act out your bloodthirsty and wicked fantasies. So let that sink in. The moment of realization for Sarah, the moment Sarah saw Gemma waiting, the moment the door is locked behind her, the sheer terror of realizing this wasn't a date, this was an ambush. Sarah was murdered that night in the flat. The prosecution confirmed that her throat was cut with a knife. She was killed during what the court described as depraved and violent sexual activity. They murdered an innocent mother of two simply for their own sick, sadistic, sexual needs. So we're going to jump forward in the timeline for a moment to April 2nd, 2024, nearly a month after Sarah walked into that flat. This brings us back to our opening scene, Rodown in New Addington, the dog walker, the bone. When the police arrived at the park that morning, the sheer scale of the horror began to unfold. This wasn't just a buried body. The remains had been dismembered. Arms, legs, a head. They were scattered and dumped in different locations across the grass. And it didn't stop there. As the investigation expanded, more body parts were found miles away, dumped in the River Wandle in Mitcham. The killers hadn't just murdered Sarah, they had treated her body literally like garbage. They had stripped her of all her dignity, hacking her apart and tossing the pieces across South London, hoping the elements or maybe wild animals or the river's current would, hide their secret. And the contrast is just wild because Rodan Fields is such a place of community. It's a place where families go, and hidden in the bushes, is the butchered body of a local woman. It's terrifying. The local community was understandably upset, confused, very scared, and the police had to issue statements to calm the public, assuring them that they were doing everything in their power to identify the victim and the killer. Using rapid DNA testing, it didn't take long for the forensic teams to confirm the identity of the remains. It was Sarah Mayhew. Her remains were examined by a pathologist, and he found bruising to scalp tissues and fractures to the voice box. And once the police knew who the victim was, they started working backwards. Who was the last person to see Sarah? Who was she talking to? And this is where the digital footprint completely destroyed Stephen and Gemma. In today's world, you cannot just make someone disappear, especially if you're out here using all this technology. Phones ping on cell towers, CCTV cameras are in every corner in London. WhatsApp messages live on servers. The police quickly zeroed in on Stephen and Gemma. And when they looked at the CCTV footage from the days immediately following the murder, what they found was undeniable. It revealed the absolute cold-blooded psychopathy of this duo. On March 9th, the very next day, while Sarah's body was literally still inside Stephen's flat, the neighbor saw Stephen outside, and the neighbor later told police that Stephen seemed pretty chirpy. He was happy and upbeat, and he had just slaughtered a woman the night before, and he was walking around the next morning with a spring in his step. On March 10th, the CCTV cameras capture the cover-up operation in full swing. The footage shows Stephen calmly walking into a store and purchasing a hacksaw, extra blades, and a bucket. Meanwhile, Gemma is caught on different CCTV cameras buying heavy-duty cleaning products like bleach, scourers, and this large, silver incinerator bin. You guys, they went to a hardware store. They bought power tools to dismember a human being and this metal incinerator bin to presumably burn evidence or burn body parts, with the same casual demeanor you or I could be buying groceries with. Over the next few days between March 7th and April 3rd, they used those tools. They meticulously dismembered Sarah's body. And what's so freaking disgusting is that in some of the WhatsApp messages, they talked about what they could do sexually with any severed parts of her body. They scrubbed his flat with bleach. They used that incinerator to burn some parts or items of Sarah, but it couldn't be recovered, so we don't know what actually was burned in that bin, but Sarah's clothing and other personal belongings had never been found. They packed her remains in bags and suitcases, and they took them to Rodan Fields and to the River Wandle, tossing them away like trash. I believe they scattered her dismembered body parts in the park, and then her torso was actually put into a suitcase and then thrown in the river. But their cleanup wasn't as perfect as they thought. When forensic teams eventually raided Stephen's flat, they sprayed luminol and used light sources, and despite the amount of bleach used, they found the undeniable traces of Sarah's blood soaked into the floor and walls of the kitchen and lounge area. I believe grout holds blood very well. They also found Stephen's Facebook account. Just 2 days later, on March 10th, the same day he bought the hacksaw, Stephen posted a quote on his Red Rum profile. It read, "Best friends are those who don't say anything when you show up at their door with a dead body. They just grab a shovel and follow you." He thought it was a joke. He was bragging in plain sight. The police didn't need long to build an ironclad case. The CCTV, the phone records showing Stephen luring Sarah, the horrifying WhatsApp messages plotting the murder between himself and Gemma, and the DNA evidence in his flat, it was overwhelming. On Saturday, April 6th, 2024, just 4 days after the first bone was found by the dog walker, the Metropolitan Police swooped in. They arrested 45-year-old Stephen and 49-year-old Gemma. When Gemma was taken to the police station for questioning on April 8th, she showed absolutely zero remorse. According to police transcripts, she actually confessed to the killing, and she kind of tried to justify it, coldly stating, she deserved it anyway, dirty crackhead. Later, she would brag to a hospital registrar saying she had killed someone and was there anyway. On April 15th, while she was in Bronzefield prison awaiting trial, she openly told a member of the staff that she had cut Sarah's throat with a knife. Stephen too tried to twist the narrative, trying to make himself into the hero of his own sick story. In a message sent some weeks after the murder, he tried to justify it by saying, "We are not evil. We done the world a service." Yeah. Even after they were both in custody, Gemma wrote to Stephen saying, "My love lasts, my evil twin." What's wrong with them? For real, what's wrong with them? On April 9, 2024, they were officially charged, but the charges were pretty specific. They were charged with murder and a very specific UK charge called prevention of the lawful and decent burial of a body. This charge is important because it speaks directly to the gruesome disposal of Sarah's remains. It highlights the immense premeditated effort they took to dismember her, to hide, her body, to deny her family a body to mourn, and to erase her existence from this earth in human form. Additionally, Stephen was hit with 3 counts of making indecent images of children, a charge that just honestly adds another sick layer of depravity to this entire case. So the case was sent to the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, reserved for the most serious crimes. The evidence against Stephen and Gemma was so deeply documented by their own digital trails and CCTV footage that they really had no way out. And rather than dragging Sarah's family through a grueling weeks-long trial where the horrific details of the dismemberment and the killing would be shown to a jury, both Stephen and Gemma decided to plead guilty. During the sentencing hearing in January 2025, the courtroom was so silent as prosecutor Tom Little laid out the facts. He read the WhatsApp messages out loud. He talked about them saying they wanted to eat human meat, the messages about the hit list, the messages about wanting to stab someone. And they even talked about what they would do to dead babies. Like, that was it for me. I was done. I was done with this case after that. The prosecutor explained to the court how their relationship was built on a foundation of sadomasochist violence and how their depraved conversations about sexual activity evolved from this fantasy into a very real, very bloody execution of someone they knew. The presiding judge, Mrs. Justice Cutts, was absolutely scathing in her remarks. She looked directly at the both of them and told them that there was nothing that Sarah did to deserve what happened to her. She was an innocent woman. She was lured to that flat to die in order for both of them to act out their bloodthirsty and wicked fantasies. She rejected their pathetic attempts to justify the murder. She highlighted the sheer terror that Sarah must have felt in her final moments, knowing she was leaving behind those 2 boys and dying in this horrific way. On Thursday, January 30th, 2025, justice was finally served. And for Stephen Sansom, it fell as hard as the UK legal system allows. Because Stephen was already on that life license for the 1998 murder of Terence Boyle, the judge had to ensure he could never, ever harm the public again. Mrs. Justice Cutts sentenced Stephen to life imprisonment with a whole life order. Now, for those who don't know, a whole life order in the UK is actually extremely rare. It means exactly what it says. There is no minimum term. There is no parole board hearing in 20 years. It means 45-year-old Stephen will be put in a cell, the door will lock, and he will only leave prison in another box. He will die behind bars. He was also given 5 years concurrently for perverting the course of justice by dismembering Sarah's body. 49-year-old Gemma, she was, standing in the dock. She reportedly held back tears as her sentence was being read, and she was also sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years though. So this means that she'll be nearly 80 years old before she's even eligible for applying for parole. And even if she's released, she will remain on license for the rest of her natural life. She also received 5 years concurrently for perverting the course of justice by dismembering Sarah's body. While the sentences do bring legal closure, it does absolutely nothing to fill the void left behind. In the courtroom, victim impact statements from Sarah's parents were read aloud. They were absolutely heartbreaking. Her mother, Angela, wrote that she's completely broken and struggles every single day to deal with the loss of her daughter. She remembered her as a beautiful, wonderful person, but noted that those memories can never be enough. She wrote, "It breaks my heart that she is not around." Her father, David, took the time to thank the defendants for pleading guilty, sparing the family the trauma of, a long trial, which is pretty noble, but his words carried the heavy unanswered weight of a grieving parent. He stated, "Whatever sentence you may receive will never compare to the pain you have caused us. I ask myself the same question all the time. Why did you have to kill her? Maybe I will never know." And then there are Sarah's 2 boys, 12 and 15. They're a bit older now, but they have to grow up still knowing not only that their mother was murdered, but how she was murdered. The absolute indignity of what was done to her body after her death is a trauma those boys will carry forever. The killers took a woman from her children who must now go on with the rest of their lives without her love, her guidance, and her support. I can't imagine how her two boys feel, because at that age, they are old enough to understand it all. You know, how can it not affect them, affect their entire life trajectory from now on? I just hope and pray that they have the support and resources to live a somewhat normal, happy life, even though it will be very difficult. The murder of Sarah Mayhew is a case that just leaves you with a sick pit in your stomach.